Chapter 11 Gremory vs Phoenix Arena. Hell Rias followed behind her peerage along the dark corridor. Their footsteps echoed with each pace they took on the thick stone tiles. They had been given 2-minute warning for the start of the raiding game and as such entered this corridor to move to their start point in the arena. The last thing Rias had done as she entered was turn back and look at Issei. The young scion warrior had given her a look of reassurance and utmost confidence before flashing her one last smile and telling that he loved her. The reassurance that Issei offered went a long way to ease the flutters that built up in Rias' stomach. His confident smirk showed that he truly believed they would succeed. Rias had often been surprised at just how confident he was with his recent shift from humanity. 2 months ago Issei had been an almost regular human and now he had unleashed his scion potential and come in possession of almost limitless power and capability. It was for this reason along with his warrior pride that the teen boy always believed he would succeed. Rias had discussed Issei's heritage and their impacts on him at great length with Drake over the last month. While Issei had been withdrawn and slightly antisocial as a human, his personality had flourished as a scion. The dragon had revealed that Issei finally felt comfortable and complete in his own skin. No longer feeling as if he was an outsider without a place in the world. Now the young teen had people he loved and would protect as well as the ability to do so. His scion blood also gave him a drive for self-improvement that fulfilled his days. These thoughts had allowed Rias to understand her boyfriend better and given rise to questions in her own mind about what the earth would have been like when scions had lived among humans. Were they different than Issei? Did they rule humanity, subjugate it, or assist them? It was something she would likely never find out. Her thoughts of Issei were pushed from her mind as a slim hand slid into hers. She looked to her left into the eyes of the other person who gave her comfort and reassurance. Her girlfriend Aquino stood confidently beside her. Aquino was the first person to ever enter her peerage and Rias' oldest and best friend as well as lover. Having her by her side at this time eased the flutters of uncertainty in her stomach further. Aquino's smile wasn't the self-assured confidence of Issei. It was a warm determination to remain by Rias' side. A silent promise to do everything in her power to defend Rias and Issei. The five exited the corridor into a deep darkness. Even with their enhanced vision the group could hardly see around themselves. What they could tell was that they stood in a courtyard with 3 exits. The path they had just traveled along sealed shut as if it had never been there, and as Rias looked back all she saw was a thick stone wall. A single source of light produced a dull throb of weak light above them and Rias looked up to see a panel of fluorescent orange numbers. The number read 43, then 42, 41. It was clear for any to see that this was a countdown until the game began. Until the match began, the group would be unable to move much with the darkness and so they remained in the courtyard watching the numbers. None spoke and as the digits trickled down to 0 Rias found herself squeezing Aquino's hand tighter and tighter. The instant the timer reached 0 light poured into the stadium from above. It took a moment for everyone to gain their vision but as they did they saw floodlights filling the area. The arena was a large oval with tiered seating rising from above the thick outer walls. A solid steel roof sealed in the entire structure. The group took in their surroundings quickly. One exit showed a thick wooded area while the other led toward a group of buildings. Rias made the snap decision and the group went toward the building complex. With the numerical disadvantage they needed to find a position that they could defend effectively. Moving from the courtyard, the peerage found themselves in a complex of a dozen buildings. The majority were single-story but a pair of double-story buildings occupied the western side adjacent to one another. The closest building had only a single entry point on the ground floor. The furthest had doors at either side. Both had too many windows to count. Rias liked the idea of only one ground-level entry point but hated the idea of easily being surrounded. Rias knew time was of the essence and went into the closest building. She was confident that if they prepared quickly enough then her strategy could work. Inside, the building had 2 rooms on the lower floor with a stairwell in the center and 4 on the second floor. Kaneko and Aquino began grabbing furniture to block up the windows. Bookcases, tables, a couch. Anything that could slow Riser's minions. Rias turned and began giving orders. Kiba. Sweep out to delay them. Weaken them if you can, but don't let anyone decisively engage you. The knight nodded to her in understanding and immediately stepped out on his task. Asia. Move upstairs and cast a barrier over the building. Leave this door open though. We want them to come in here. Be our lookout and let us know where they are and what they're doing. Asia started concentrating on the magical energy needed for such a barrier as she made her way upstairs to find the best vantage point. Kaneko. Stalk and target their weakest. It was vague instructions, but Kaneko knew the intent immediately. She finished flipping a two-seat couch into a window and left the building. Akino. Once this place is as boarded up as possible, we will set ourselves up at the base of the stairs. If this floor gets overwhelmed, then we will move upstairs alongside Asia. Right. Akino replied as she bustled around the room, moving everything she could to give them an advantage. Will this work? She continued. Rias paused for a second and thought reflectively. She was sure that Riser would be overconfident and once he found them would simply charge in without consideration. That was what she hoped for at least. Kiba sped from the building and looked around, trying to prioritize the path he would take. He wasn't sure where the majority of Riser's peerage would be, but wanted to avoid encountering any large groups too soon. During the evenings of the last fortnight, Kiba had read quite a bit on military tactics. Predominantly small team tactics. While human warfare was different to that of devils, the basics of maneuver, mutual support and surprise still easily applied. As such, Kiba understood the intent behind Ria's plan. Kiba would use his sword birth ability to create demonic swords that he could hide and use as traps to confuse, weaken and delay Riser's peerage. If he caused enough mayhem, then it would distract Riser from any plan he had devised and give Rias the advantage. With that knowledge in mind, he began summoning simple demonic swords. They didn't have to be overly strong or versatile. As each appeared, Kiba would use his abilities to cause the blades to dissipate into the walls of the buildings. Once hidden, they were set as a simple trap. Soon Kiba had trapped the ring of outer buildings. Each building had swords hidden at random. He wanted to avoid making any traps predictable or summoning too many swords in this area. With the last trap set, he moved to the large wooded area that occupied the majority of the arena. Kiba knew that he would only be able to summon 3 or 4 more swords before he would reach his maximum. Once within the tree line, Kiba began moving slowly and cautiously, stalking within the wooded area to hinder their opponents. It wasn't long until he heard the first signs of his approaching enemies. Kiba quickly scaled up a thick tall maple tree and watched for the approaching foes. 4 individuals came strolling into view shortly after. They were nonchalantly searching the area for Rias' peerage. It was clear that Rias had been right in believing that they would be overconfident and complacent. Over the past fortnight, the whole peerage had dedicated part of their days to learning who each of Riser's members were. As such, Kiba recognized the 4 women approaching his position. They strolled in pairs with a slight distance between each pair. The front 2 was Mira, a blue-haired pawn that fought with a wooden staff. Beside her was another pawn, Burant, a busty brunette who fought with martial arts similar to Kaneko. Behind her was Shuelan, the rook who had previously accompanied Riser to their clubhouse. Alongside her was a knight, Carlamine. She wore thick armor that rang slightly as she walked and carried a long sword at her hip. Kiba acted quickly. Balancing on a branch with his legs, he pushed his hands together and concentrated in an almost meditative stance. 4 long demonic swords burst from the ground in a cross around the unsuspecting girls. Unlike the blades he had used for the traps, these swords were long and intricate weapons capable of diverse strikes and combinations under Kiba's control. Silent as the dead of night, the blades pivoted their points toward the group and projected toward them. As Kiba had suspected, Shuelan and Carlamine reacted to the blades the fastest. Shuelan braced herself and deflected the razor-sharp steel with a smooth palm strike to the flat side of the blade that knocked the sword away from her. Carlamine drew her own weapon with masterful precision and parried the sword. Her parry caused the airborne blade to be sent skyward. The blade paused momentarily before slicing down toward her. The two pawns were less prepared for the attack. Mira failed to dodge the blade and was instead cut deep to the side of her ribs. She staggered from the blow and dropped to her right knee with a scowl of pain across her face as blood flowed from her side. As she did, the blade struck her with the flat of its side, rendering her unconscious. The second pawn Burent was slow at reacting as well, however she was able to dodge aside. But with the defeat of her fellow pawn, she quickly found herself in a losing battle against the two blades. Kiba concentrated on manipulating the 4 aerial blades against the girls. While he did, he kept his senses alert for anyone approaching, as he was distinctly aware of how vulnerable he was in his concealed position. Riser Phoenix pawn, Nira Krantz, has been eliminated. Graphia's voice echoed throughout the stadium as the girl's body vanished from where she had lay prone in a soft flash of pink light. Kiba didn't let the good news distract him though, as he continued to direct and manipulate the 4 blades into continuing their onslaught. A blade swung toward Carloman but was blocked by her long sword. As it went to disengage, she twisted her own blade and caused the summoned weapon to shatter in the process. Shuelan dodged aside a strike, however the blade soared past her and cut deeply into the left shoulder of Burent, who yelled out in pain. Another blade arced upward for a downward slice at Shuelan, but the rook leapt into the air and drove the blade into the ground, destroying it in the process. Graphia's voice broke through the air of the arena once again. Riser Phoenix Knight, Cirrus Minami, has been eliminated. Kiba smiled slightly, knowing that his friends were doing as well as he was. Shuelan and Carloman closed in around their injured companion and began blocking and parrying against the attacks made by Kiba's remaining 2 swords. Kiba knew it was only a matter of time until his 2 remaining weapons were destroyed, and so dismissed one while going on a very aggressive offensive with the second. The blade swung wildly against Carloman, causing the opposing knight to backpedal. Kiba's weapon was unable to capitalize on its success, however, as Shuelan struck hard against it, causing the metal to crack, and Carloman's follow-up slice broke the blade completely. The weapon had done its job though, as during the final melee, Kiba had dropped silently down from the tree and left the area as stealthily as possible. With one member eliminated and another needing care, Kiba was confident that they would be delayed sufficiently. His start had been successful, and as such Kiba felt quietly confident as he dashed whilst crouched low in the underbrush until he was sure he was far enough from the group he had attacked. He then listened before moving on back toward the building complex. Kaneko. Kaneko had left the building complex immediately. She had seen Kiba laying traps and moved directly to the wooded area before him. Once in the cover of the undergrowth, she began moving like a prowling feline, stalking from shadow to shadow, softly gracing the ground with her feet so as to create the most minimal of sound. It wasn't long before she had moved quite the distance from the building complex and encountered a group of 4. She stayed within the shadows, watching and studying the group, identifying who it was that she was stalking. They moved in a loose line through the woodlands. The closest to Kaneko was Cirrus, a blue-haired knight who utilized a large Zweihander blade. Kaneko knew her to be fast, powerful, and dangerous. Next along was Marion, a light brunette pawn who wore a maid's outfit and fought in a loose style of martial arts. Beside her was Sharia, another pawn with long gray hair and wearing a metallic bikini. Furthest from Kaneko was Maihi, a bishop with long dark hair wearing a traditional style orange and purple kimono. Kaneko stalked along to the side of the group. She ensured that she was slightly behind them to remain out of their peripheral vision and waited for a chance to strike. She knew that if she changed in, then she would be the one defeated and would be throwing away the advantage of surprise. Nearly 20 minutes elapsed and the group was approaching the center of the arena. Kaneko didn't want to wait much longer, as sooner rather than later they would find Ria's position and center in on her. Fate smiled on Kaneko though as a voice boomed throughout the arena. Riser Phoenix pawn, Nira Krantz, has been eliminated. The 4 girls stopped and looked upward briefly. That was all the distraction she needed. Kaneko darted forward and leapt onto Cirrus, dragging the girl to the ground. As she did, she struck repeatedly against the knight's head. The 3rd hit struck her temple and she felt the stunned girl spasm as she was sent unconscious. With her ambush successful, Kaneko sprinted away back deeper into the woodlands. She sidestepped instinctively as a blast of magical energy crashed into a tree beside her, causing it to freeze into a bright blue shadow of its former self. Riser Phoenix Knight, Cirrus Minami, has been eliminated, the voice of Graphia said again. After nearly a minute of escaping, Kaneko looked back and saw Shiraya chasing after her. The pawn was relentless in pursuing the white-haired Nakomata, but Kaneko realized this could be to her advantage. They had traveled so far so quickly that Shiraya had become separated from her friends and alone. This gave Kaneko a brilliant opportunity to strike. With a swift pivot of her foot, she sprang back against the pawn. The gray-haired girl was stunned and quickly overwhelmed by Kaneko. Despite her best efforts, she wasn't able to withstand the barrage of precision strikes the rook sent her way. Training with the weighted clothes and enhanced gravity had allowed Kaneko to become that much faster and more powerful than her over-eager opponent. Within less than a minute of fighting, Shiraya lay unconscious at Kaneko's feet. The young girl wasted no time though and immediately darted away from the scene of her fight to her left, away from where she had been moving previously, and listened for her two remaining prey. Shiraya vanished in a burst of soft pink light as Graphia's voice once again filled the air. Riser Phoenix pawn, Shiraya, has been eliminated. Kaneko waited for what seemed to be close to 10 minutes but heard and saw nothing. She decided Mai and Marion must have taken a different path and began to stalk off toward where they had last been seen. She would not let her prey escape her. Asterisk home base Gremory asterisk. Akino stood beside Rias. Inside the building looked very much like a castle under siege. Furniture piled up against every opening except the main entrance. Two coffee tables had been stacked across each other in front of Rias and Akino to make getting to the girls a bit more difficult while still allowing the magic users to blast at anyone who came toward the door. Nearly an hour and a half of the match had passed so far without any sight of Riser's members for the two girls. They had heard Graphia announce the defeat of 3 of his peerage so far, and so they knew that Kiba and Kaneko were already harassing his group. 3 down was a great start, but it still left a long way to go. The silence was broken when Asia called down softly from the top of the stairs. Guys! 4 people just came into the area from the north, I think. There's 2 buildings between us and them. She was trying to give as much detail as possible, but unfortunately the young nun didn't have any real knowledge on strategy and was just saying what she thought would be useful. Keeping her voice low, Rias called back up, "Can you tell who it is?" "Sorry, no." Asia replied in the same hushed tones. The 2 senior devils waited, feeling more on edge and alert. A scream broke the air and Asia called out slightly excitedly, "Oh, one of Kiba's traps just got one." Neither girls replied as they could tell someone had just been attacked or injured. Riser Phoenix Rook, Isabella Trina, has been eliminated. The voice of Graphia said, once again lowering his remaining forces down to 12. Rias felt a small bubble of hope build up inside her. They had defeated a quarter without any losses. Quiet filled the air again, and then voices could be heard along with the clang of steel on steel. One such voice Rias recognized from having met the owner before. "It's Ravel." Her voice was neutral and very matter of fact. Ravel Phoenix, Riser's younger sister and a bishop in his peerage. As a pure-blooded devil herself, it was extremely odd for her to be a member of another devil's peerage. Especially her brothers. Rias could remember the scandal it had created when the public had found out about her subservience, and many had speculated that Riser was up to something untoward with his younger sister due to his chauvinistic disposition. Nothing had ever been confirmed though, and Ravel remained silent on the matter. The sound of the girls fighting off the simple blades filled the air while Aquino and Rias both tracked the location of the commotion. Eventually they saw movement and the blonde girl with her 2 companions came into view. Accompanying Ravel was 2 Nakomata twins, Enai and Lee, who were pawns of Riser that fought in the same martial arts style as Kaneko. At the sight of them, Aquino unleashed a blast of lightning. Unfortunately, the distance gave Ravel time to respond, and she produced a barrier of magical energy that protected the trio long enough for them to withdraw before the bolts of electricity could break through. What preceded was a few minutes of skirmishing between the groups. Ravel would unleash bursts of enhanced flames at the building that dissipated against the barrier Asia maintained, while Rias and Aquino would volley back with bolts of harsh purple lightning and bursts of destruction magic. The building that Ravel and her group were using for cover was being torn apart by the continual strikes of magic, while the Gremory base was holding due to the barrier that Asia was flowing her magic into. After firing a series of 3 blasts of fire, Rias and Ravel's eyes locked and recognition showed on Ravel's face. Ravel gave an order that neither Rias nor Aquino could hear, and the 3 opponents retreated. Shortly after, a burst of flame flew into the air and both girls knew it was a signal. The main fight would come soon, it seemed. Kaneko. The burst of fire filled the sky and Kaneko knew it was within the building complex. She moved as fast as she could toward it. As she moved, the voice of Grafia once again filled the air. Riser Phoenix Pawn, Burant, is unable to continue. That was one less to worry about. Kaneko noticed rapid movement to her front and dropped to the ground. Riser passed by toward the buildings with his queen, Ubaluna, and 2 pawns, twins by the names of Lee and Nell. The twins looked younger than Kaneko and had vibrant aqua hair. What was surprising the most was their choice of weapons. Each carrying a long, brightly colored and tasseled chainsaw. Kaneko was going to move again when she saw more opponents traveling toward the buildings as well. Her earlier prey, Marian and Maihi. Kaneko picked herself up and trailed after the pair. They entered the built-up area and began moving along the streets toward the rest of their compatriots. Unfortunately for them, their eagerness was part of their downfall as they passed by a trap of kibas and swords fired from the walls either side of them. Maihi covered herself immediately in a magical shell that the blades failed to penetrate, but Marian was not so lucky. A blade pierced her left calf, caused blood to spurt from the painful gash as the girl was dragged to the ground, while another floating blade dropped its heavy pommel into her head. The blow drove the girl's head into the ground and knocked her unconscious. Her body lay motionless on the ground before vanishing in the same soft pink light, with Grafia's voice filling the air once again. Riser Phoenix Pawn, Marian, has been eliminated. With their job complete, the blades vanished from existence and Kaneko took her chance. She charged toward the opposing bishop as she dropped her shell. With a burst of speed, Kaneko swiftly lunged forward to strike at her opponent. The girl twisted aside at the last safe moment, causing her to sail past harmlessly. Kaneko skidded as her feet touched the ground. The instant she turned to face her opponent, though, she was forced to cross her arms over her face as a gust of icy magic blasted into her. Ice crystals formed on her arms and in her hair as the magic clung to whatever it could grasp. Kaneko felt the extra weight of it on her body, yet it didn't slow her. In comparison to the weighted clothes or enhanced gravity, a little ice was nothing to complain about. Still, Kaneko knew she had to win fast against Maihi. If not, she ran the risk of being frozen solid by the girl's magic, and that was something no amount of weight training would assist her with. Kaneko dropped herself into a roll to the right and sprang left the moment her feet perched flat on the ground. With each step closer to her opponent, she darted left or right in no specific pattern at all. Maihi fired steams of freezing magic at her, and Kaneko could feel the temperature dropping around her as she got closer. Despite that, the look in Maihi's eyes told Kaneko that she feared being engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and the white-haired Nakomata understood why. Maihi's strength and talent lay only in magic. If Kaneko could negate that by closing the distance between them, then this fight was won. Kaneko dodged once more and then put on another burst of speed, her muscles beginning to burn at the exertion in the rapidly cooling environment. The air around them well below freezing now. There was less than 5 meters between them, and she dropped into a slide, crashing into the other girl. Maihi tumbled down as Kaneko took out her legs from beneath her. As she slid under, Kaneko twisted herself on top of the other girl and prepared to strike down. Maihi raised her left arm in defense, but it was too late. Kaneko's elbow had already passed through her defenses and collided with the bishop's temple. At the same time, though, Kaneko felt a deep freezing cold encrusting her lower body. Her elbow struck true on Maihi's jaw, shifting it slightly and causing the girl to lose consciousness. Kaneko's win was dampened, though, when she realized that from the hips down she had been frozen onto the ground. In a last-minute decision, Maihi had frozen Kaneko's lower body to the ground. Kaniko's triumph had become a Pyrrhic victory. Maihi's body vanished from right below her as Graphia's voice once again filled the stadium. Riser Phoenix Bishop, Maihi, has been eliminated. Kaniko wasted no time and began trying to pry her limbs from the magical ice, yet it held firm. She twisted and started to beat into it with her fists, and yet as small cracks formed, the structure itself held firm. Approaching footsteps took her concentration and she turned to the source before letting out a groan. Before her stood Ravel along with Ai and Lee. The girl stood looking down on her, but Kaniko was unable to lash out against them in her current position. Her eyes locked on the deep blue of Ravel's, and the blonde girl smirked before unleashing an intense blast of magical fire at Kaniko. Kaniko felt the immense pressure and pain overwhelm her before the world turned black and she was in the match no longer. Kiba. Kiba dashed from one building to another as he entered the building complex. He had seen the majority of Riser's peerage converge on the area and knew he had to return to Ria's position as fast as he possibly could. He entered a single-story small building that was only slightly larger than a garden shed when Graphia's voice filled the air again. Rias Gremmaris Rook, Kaniko Tuju, has been eliminated. Kiba could have sworn that he heard a hint of annoyance in Graphia's voice as she declared Kaniko's defeat. Kiba felt bad for Kaniko losing, but he knew it was likely to happen to quite a few of them. At the end of the day, they had started this match with a third of the manpower than their enemy. Kiba shook those thoughts from his mind and continued on his way toward making it back to the three at their camp. Minutes passed as he crept along the shadows. Kiba could hear the sounds of spells crashing against a barrier and knew that their main camp was under attack. As Kiba moved through a building to avoid the main pathways outside, he heard the sound of quick footsteps smacking against the hard ground, signaling a rapid approach. He turned toward the source, but was too late. A foot collided with his chest and he was propelled into a wall. As he struck, his body slumped forward with the pain, but he didn't allow it to faze him and leapt to his feet so that he could face his opponents. In front of him stood Shuelan and Carlamine. Kiba's remaining sword, the one he had previously dismissed, appeared instantly in his hands. The girls recognized the long, intricate blade. "You're the one who ambushed us before," Shuelan accused of him. "Yep," Kiba replied simply. "Two of you are down, time to finish the job." He let his voice sound as confident as issei, although he wasn't sure he felt as confident. Both girls fanned out, attempting to pincer Kiba from either side, but the Gremmery Knight circled around, keeping them both in front of him. Seconds ticked by when both girls launched themselves at him in an offensive. Kiba braced and parried Carlamine's swing whilst leaning back to avoid Shuelan's right cross. The fist passed by him and he struck back against the rook with his elbow before swinging his sword overhead at his opposing knight. Carlamine parried Kiba's strike and followed up with a strike of her own. The three continued fighting around the room as the minutes ticked by. Kiba's weight and gravity training was giving him the advantage in speed and stamina, however, as a rook, Shuelan's superior strength was causing some serious wounds on him when she landed successful hits against him. With blood dripping down from above his right eye, Kiba took a wide swing in an arc around himself to gain distance from the two girls. Numerous slices and cuts covered both of his opponents, whilst Kiba suffered from a number of contusions to his body and was sure his left shoulder was close to dislocated. His right eye was swollen with blood continuing to drip from the open wound. Kiba darted forward and feinted an overhand swing against Carlamine. Instead, as she raised her sword to defend herself, he drove his blade inside the guard of her left armpit. The strike pierced her skin and blood flowed freely as Kiba's sword passed through. Carlamine grit her teeth in sheer agony and a sneer of pure determination took to her face. Kiba kept moving with the momentum of his attack and used himself as a battering ram against the girl. The pair crashed to the ground with her sword leaving her hands and Kiba's wedged into her flesh. Kiba twisted and released the grip of his sword, leaving it in his opponent. She had lost a substantial amount of blood and strength. Kiba knew she wouldn't be able to continue fighting for long. He wasn't on his feet for more than a moment though, as a roundhouse kick from Shuelan crashed into his ribs, driving him into the ground. Kiba felt the air drive from his lungs as Shuelan followed up with a stomp onto his chest. He moved to raise his arms to defend himself but was unable to as the skilled martial artist dropped down and began delivering crippling blows to his face and head. The last thing Kiba registered was Carlomine's failed attempts to pull herself up before he lost consciousness as well. Home base Gremory. A continuous barrage of magical energy was bombarding the barrier of their firm point. Yubaluna had joined the offensive against the building. Her explosive magic was far more powerful than that of Ravel, and Rias had been forced to concentrate her magic on sustaining the shield with Asia lest it drop and they be overwhelmed with haste. The match had passed its third hour when Graphia's voice once again filled the air of the arena. Rias Gremory Knight, Kiba Yuto and Riser Phoenix Knight, Carlomine Seidel have been defeated. Rias was saddened by the defeat of both Kiba and Kaneko, but by her count they had responsible for the defeat of half of their opponents. They had definitely pulled their weight. The barrage of magic ceased against the building and Rias took the risk to cease pouring magic into the defense. Asia maintained the shield, but the young bishop was quickly becoming exhausted by her efforts. Time passed and with it a strange quiet covered the arena. Rias and Aquino remained at the entrance waiting for what was to come next. They knew that to leave the building would mean their instant defeat. Riser's voice broke the silence with a mocking arrogance. "All right, Rias, you have had your fun. Now we have your silly little building surrounded. Come out or we will come in. Either way I am making you mine today. My plaything whether you want it or not." He laughed sadistically as he sneered the final sentence at her. Rias felt bile fill in her throat and Aquino shifted angrily, but Rias placed her hand on Aquino's arm to calm the girl down. "Don't let him get in your head. He is grumpy and embarrassed that so many of his peerage have lost so far," Rias said softly. Aquino gave her a quick loving smile and a nod before returning to focusing on the entrance that they had focused on thus far. "What we need now is a plan. Unfortunately, every way I play it out doesn't end well for us. If they all rush in here we will be overwhelmed before Issei reaches us, and if we go out there it's the same deal," Rias whispered with frustration filling her voice at the difficult situation. Aquino knew that Rias was right. What they needed was for Rias to be able to reach Issei. Aquino was confident that the boy they loved could defend Rias and defeat Riser easily. It was getting her there that was the hard part. It was then that Aquino realized their only option. She would be happy to do it for Rias. "Asia," she called out softly. "Come down here. I've got a plan." Rias gave her a quizzical look as the bishop came down the stairs. As she reached the pair, Aquino gave them her plan. "Okay, so Rias, babe, you aren't going to like this, but I know how we win this. I'm going to charge out there. Asia is going to create a mighty flash as I do so, and you are going run as hard and as fast as you can straight to the entrance we came in. Once Asia and I have been beaten, Issei will be allowed in the game and then we win. We know we need him to win and we know that this is the only way to get him in the match." Aquino spoke quickly, knowing that Rias would argue with her. She knew it wasn't in Rias' nature to let others get harmed for her, but she also knew that this was the only way to proceed. She looked to Asia as Rias began protesting. The nun nodded before speaking. "I'm in," she said with determination. Rias argued against the two remaining members of her peerage, but they politely told her that while this was technically a mutiny, they were doing it for her benefit and wanted her to be safe and free of Riser. Rias tried to argue but stopped when Aquino placed a finger on her lips. Her queen and girlfriend looked deeply into her eyes. "Rias, let me do this for you. I have to keep you safe and protect you. I love you so very much that I will happily sacrifice myself for you." Aquino spoke with a voice full of passion and care for Rias. Rias couldn't say no that and instead nodded with small tears forming at the sides of her eyes. She had seen people hurt and killed before. She had been responsible, but never had she had someone so willingly throw themselves against insurmountable odds for her. "Well, it seems you all have no backbone, so we will be coming in," Riser's voice yelled out harshly to the girls. At that moment Asia amplified the light of the closest floodlight and the whole arena shone with an immense brightness. Aquino and Asia rushed out of the front of the building toward where they knew the majority of their opponents were. The moment she came outside, Aquino could see members of Riser's peerage covering their eyes and stunned from the blinding pain. Before her, with themselves defenseless, was the twins Lee and Nell. Without missing a beat, Aquino unleashed a torrent of magic against the pair. The two girls screamed out in pain as their unprepared bodies were overwhelmed by the magical lightning, and they dropped to the ground with their chainsaws crashing by their feet as they did so. Aquino had no time to enjoy her victory, however, as fire rained down upon her and she was forced to dart to the side with Asia close on her heels. Aquino looked toward where the flames had come from and saw Riser, Ravel and Ubeluna standing together on the roof of a building across from them. Riser let a sneer cross his lips as he spoke to the girls. "Oh, is Rias too scared to face me? How well, I suppose she will have to savor her last few minutes of freedom," he mocked toward the girls. "You will never lay another hand on my Rias. We won't let you." Aquino spat back with a voice filled with disgust. "Oh, she's yours, is she?" Riser questioned in a taunting voice. "It doesn't matter. Once she is mine, then all of you will be as well." Asia was disgusted by the idea of having to be near this man and felt herself yelling back with more confidence than she thought she had. "Not once we beat you." Riser and Ubeluna laughed while Ravel remained silent. Aquino and Asia spread their wings and launched themselves at the trio. Riser remained stationary while Ravel unleashed a torrent of fire at the pair, and Ubeluna joined her with her own explosive magic. The spells she fired at the pair shot out like small fireballs but exploded in the air in a manner such as a compacted grenade. An explosion caught Asia and she was driven from the sky. She hit the ground hard and saw a fresh wave of explosive spells bear down on her. She knew that she didn't have much to use but poured all of her remaining magic into the wind spell Aquino had taught her. She unleashed it on the explosives, causing the spell to catch the magical bomblets and push them back to their caster. Meanwhile, Aquino had darted around Ravel's fire blasts and was responding with bolts of lightning of her own. The pair fired back and forth until Aquino felt the blast of wind. She folded her wings in on herself to protect herself while throwing another bolt of lightning at Ravel. Ubeluna's eyes widened at seeing her spells propel back on her and darted back along with Riser. Ravel, however, hadn't noticed, and the explosives detonated close to the girl, knocking her off balance and wounding her severely. Aquino took advantage of the opening and unleashed a potent torrent of magical lightning on her opponent. Ravel screamed out in pain before collapsing unconscious. Aquino let the wind pass her and then rushed toward the two remaining devils before her. She spared a glance toward Asia. As she did, the bishop lay unconscious. The effort of creating such a powerful wind blast had drained the last of the energy from the girl. Aquino fired a bolt of lightning at Riser, but it was easily intercepted by Ubeluna, who countered with a storm of magical bullets that barraged her. She knew that Riser's queen was powerful but didn't realize just how much more so than her that she was. The explosives detonated and Aquino felt her defenses dissolve. Immediately she was unable to continue flying, crashing into the roof only a few meters from her two opponents. Aquino lifted her head and saw the incoming foot too late. Rias. As the light blinded Riser's peerage, Rias sprinted out of the building with her members but turned to the east and ran straight toward the entrance that she had come through. Graphia's voice filled the area announcing Lee and Nell's defeat. This gave Rias a small smile. That smile was short-lived as Ravel and Asia's defeat shortly followed. Rias feared that the next name announced would be Aquino's. She passed the edge of the buildings heading toward the corridor adjacent to the courtyard they had initially entered through when she saw the Nakomata twins, Ni and Lee, were hot on her tail. They sped towards her in pursuit. Rias twisted and fired a barrage of destruction blasts at the pair. Lee dodged aside, but Ni was less lucky, getting struck head-on by the potent magic. Her body dropped to the ground at the same moment that Rias stepped into the courtyard. Graphia's voice filled the arena once again. Riser Phoenix Pawn, Ni and Rias Gramarie's queen, Aquino have been eliminated. Rias Gramarie's evil peerage has been depleted. Her key peerage may now participate. Rias felt a mix of emotions at the announcement. She felt relief that Issei was on his way, anger at Akino's defeat and anxiety that Issei wouldn't make it in time. Finally she felt hope that with him by her side they could win. Rias took cover in the courtyard before unleashing another burst of destruction magic against Lee, who kept her distance from the far more powerful devil. *Issei*. Unlike those in the arena, Issei had spent the match able to hear both Graphia's announcements as well as the jeers, cries, support and commotion of the crowd. The opinion of Rias' peerage had steadily increased as they outperformed risers. However, when Issei heard first Kaneko and then Kiba become eliminated, he knew it wouldn't be long before he would be moving in. With Asia's defeat, he stood up and began channeling his ki, steadily rising it in a manner similar to how he did when utilizing it for the Kaioken. He wanted to have his ki ready and prepared for battle the moment he moved into the arena, in exactly the same manner as he had when he fought against the Saiyan warrior the night before. Akino's defeat filled the air, and with that Issei knew he could participate. He swore upon his girlfriends that Riser would lay at his feet for threatening and harming both of them. The door disappeared from in front of him and Issei flew down the corridor at a blistering speed. It was less than 5 seconds later when the light of the far end illuminated the arena for Issei. Rias was immediately in his vision. She was unleashing a barrage of spells at a target outside of the courtyard but was unaware of the person creeping up behind her. Issei shifted his trajectory and rocketed out of the tunnel, throwing his left fist forward as he did so. Issei passed harmlessly over Rias as his fist collided with an oblivious Shuilan. The rook stood no chance against the mighty strike and was thrown back into the courtyard wall, crumpling down to the ground instantly. She was unconscious before she had even hit the wall. Issei's foot touched the ground for barely an instant when he pivoted and charged past Rias in mighty bounds with his sights set firmly on the Nikomata. Lee's eyes widened in shocked recognition too late as Issei passed her and delivered a swift chop to the back of her neck, coming to an abrupt halt as he did so. He glanced back and watched as the girl's eyes rolled up into her head a single moment before she crumpled onto the ground beside him. He saw Rias staring at him from behind and flashed her a confident smile. She looked at him for a moment before walking toward him with a pout. "You're such a show-off sometimes." She chastised him with a voice that lacked any seriousness and was full of relief. Issei's smile became playful as he scratched the back of his head. "Not my fault they pose no challenge," he remarked while letting his scion pride fill his voice. The bodies of the two girls vanished from where they had fallen in the familiar pink glow as Graphia's voice once again boomed out across the stadium. "Riser, Phoenix, Rook, Shuilan and Pawn, Lee have been eliminated. So where is the great jack-off?" Issei asked casually as he glanced around while standing very much off guard. Rias went to reply when an angry voice spoke from above. "That's no way to speak about your betters, you worthless rodent." Rias and Issei looked up. Above the roofs of the closest building floated Riser and Yubaluna. Great wings of fire spread out from Riser's back while the regular bat-like wings of a devil were spread from Yubaluna's. Both flapped rhythmically, keeping themselves afloat. Yubaluna held a look of reserved assessment on her face while Riser had nothing but arrogance and superiority. Issei snickered before clutching at his sides and bursting out into great fits of laughter. He exaggerated each syllable as he laughed and wiped at an imaginary tear as he stretched upright. "I don't see any betters above me. Just a pompous idiot with stupid wings." Issei let his voice fill with mockery. He knew that Riser would respond and bite at the bait if he let it out so openly. To Issei's surprise, though, it was Yubaluna who bit back at his remark. "How dare you speak so toward Lord Riser? Have you no respect?" Her voice was filled with genuine anger, and Issei pondered for a moment if Riser had actually managed to have someone devoted to him wholly. Issei took a breath before responding. "For him, no, none at all. But I have no reason to fight you. So if you could just resign so that I can teach him to leave my Rias alone, that would be great." Rias blushed slightly at the mention of being referred to as his Rias. It was a remark that Riser had noticed as well. However, it was Yubaluna who continued. "No!" She shouted back and flew forward while preparing a large explosive blast in her hands. It had barely left her hand when an orb of ki shot through the attack, causing it to split in two and detonate prematurely. Yubaluna wrapped her arms in front of herself to withstand the blast and was shocked when she opened her eyes to see issei directly in front of her. Before she could register anything though, a knee crashed into her stomach, causing her to bend forward, and then her world went black. Issei removed his knee and straightened up after striking the back of her neck so that he could stare at Riser as the arrogant Devil's Queen fell to the ground below. Rias caught the falling girl and waited for her body to vanish from the arena while Riser gawked wide-eyed at the saiyan. You. He spluttered. I will destroy you. Riser's voice was filled with anger toward the saiyan that had just casually made a mockery of his unbeatable queen. Issei simply raised his left hand in front of himself and flicked the fingers toward himself in a come-at-me gesture as Graphia's voice once again filled the arena. Riser Phoenix Queen, Yubaluna Lane, has been eliminated. At the instant those words were spoken, Riser acted. He flew forward at a speed he had yet to display and struck out with a left straight against Issei. Yet for all his speed and precision, it was nothing against the saiyan, who casually shifted to the right and pivoted his hips in line with the high-class devil's torso. A quick extension of his left leg resulted in a firm snap kick striking into Riser, sending the arrogant blonde crashing into the thick wooded area to the left of them. Issei heard Riser's yell of frustration and glanced down to Rias. His girlfriend looked up at him with confident eyes, and Issei indicated for her to move away and behind him for the remainder of the fight. Rias complied and spread her own wings, rising up and landing on the roof of a nearby single-story building from where she could watch her boyfriend do what he did best. Riser shot up out of the thickets, leaving a blaze of fresh flames behind in his wake. The wound Issei had delivered on him completely had healed, but his expensive clothes marred with small rips and tears. Riser raised his hands and began to slash them through the air toward Issei. Each way he slashed, a great line of fire flew out toward the young saiyan. Issei let his grin grow as he flew toward his target, twisting, turning, and pivoting through the blades of fire like a pilot performing aerial tricks. As he drew near to the fire-born devil, he increased his speed, dramatically shooting forward in a blaze of white aura, and crashed his fist into Riser's stomach. Spittle spray forth from the stricken man's mouth, and Issei followed up with a hammer fist to the back, firing his opponent back into the woodlands. Issei smirked as he watched Riser crash and the surrounding area burst into flames while the man screamed his hate. The scream of anger caused Issei's smirk to broaden as Riser flew up toward him again. Riser rose once more from the inferno he had created. This time his clothes had torn further and his face was twisted in a look of sheer and absolute hatred as he gazed upon Issei. Rias saw the look in Riser's eyes and immediately knew that the fight was going to become ugly before it was over. Not only was Issei beating Riser, he was humiliating him. Constantly striking him down easily and then simply waiting for him to come back, all the while doing so without appearing to use much effort. For someone who had spent their entire life thinking themselves superior, it was devastating. Rias thought she knew why his boyfriend was doing it. He wanted to inflict pain on Riser for how he had treated her, and the smirk on his face confirmed that theory, but when she saw the look in his eye, she realized that wasn't all. It took her strategic reasoning less than a moment to work it out. Issei was playing with Riser, but he was doing it for a reason. He was analyzing how Riser moved and responded to being hit. He knew Riser could regenerate and was assessing how that regeneration worked while not wasting any excess energy. Rias let a humble smile cross her lips. She knew her boyfriend wasn't dumb, not a genius yet also not dumb, but she didn't realize he was quite that smart. Riser shot forward toward Issei again. This time he was determined to land strikes against the boy that was mocking him. Issei remained still in the air and allowed the fire devil to assault him. Riser threw a series of hooks, jabs, and crosses. Issei dodged and heaved deftly, blocking and palming the strikes aside with ease. Riser threw an overhand haymaker that Issei ducked into. While the fist sailed past him, he pushed his hand into the devil's chest and unleashed a moderate ki blast. The energy erupted on contact with Riser and threw him back at blistering speeds in the air. This time, however, the arrogant devil was able to halt himself while still airborne, and Issei watched as the torn and burnt skin healed as if the ki had never bitten into it. This confirmed to Issei that no matter the source of the attack, Riser would heal. Issei had another experiment he wanted to conduct and wasted no time in acting on it. He rushed forward and as Riser got his bearings, a hand gripped into his shoulder and a fist crashed into his stomach. Riser took the blow well and responded with a knee that Issei blocked before continuing to strike rapidly against his opponent. Riser attempted to defend himself or counterattack, but Issei broke through his defenses easily whilst still dodging or blocking anything the arrogant noble could throw at him. Issei felt ribs snap below his strikes and soft tissue tear as he barraged Riser with strike after strike. He raised his knee repeatedly into the soft portion of Riser's thigh until he felt the femur break and then delivered an overhead strike with his heel that shot Riser into the ground below. Issei floated watching as the body of Riser twitched and shook in pain before healing. The large breaks healed slower than the cuts and bruises, however. Within 20 seconds Riser climbed back to his feet and spread his flaming wings. He beat his wings and flew once again up toward Issei. He stopped level with the scion and the pair stared each other down. "That's all you have, isn't it?" Riser spat toward Issei. "Strength, speed, and your strange magic. But against a devil like myself who is immortal you cannot win. Eventually you will get tired and I will beat you." Despite his recent losses, Riser laughed heartily at his comment. He was sure that he would win no matter what. Issei didn't respond for a moment before speaking with a voice of absolutism. "You're not immortal," he stated simply. "What?" "Yes, I am," Riser yelled back, taken aback by both Issei's statement and his lack of concern for facing an immortal foe. "No," Issei continued, "you're not. In no way are you immortal. It is taking up your energy, your stamina and endurance to heal yourself. I could see that in how the large breaks healed slower and it is taking you longer, only ever so slightly but still longer each time to attack me. You see, it is you who will lose once you are exhausted, because that I will still have my strength, speed, and strange magic. Issei replied calmly while putting on a mocking tone with the last few words. Riser stared at Issei for a moment in shock, anger, outrage, and if the scion was seeing things as he thought, he was then also fear. Before Riser could respond though, Issei recommenced his assault by flying at the devil. For the next 2 hours the pair fought whilst Rias watched. Issei delivered crippling blows time and time again, harsh strikes to Riser's ribs, chest and long bones, while occasionally injuring the devil with moderate ki blasts as well. Each time Riser collapsed he would heal and come back, but each time the healing took longer. That's not to say Issei didn't get hit as well. Cuts and bruises dotted and covered the scion as time passed, but compared to the devil who was repeatedly torn apart by his opponent, he looked to be in the pinnacle of health. Riser began to show more anger, fear and outrage as the fight went on and his attacks became more unwieldy, less controlled. He unleashed great swathes of fire around. Twice he tried to circumvent Issei by attacking Rias directly, but the scion outmaneuvered him and smacked the devil hard enough to fire him away through the air from Rias' location, thereby keeping the fight with himself. As the match fast approached the 6-hour time limit, Riser raised himself up from the raging inferno beneath him to be in line with the scion once again. His clothing was torn to shreds, and while Issei was breathing with a slight pant as if he had run a moderate jog for a few miles, Riser was sweating heavily and panting in deep breaths to fill his lungs. The blonde devil looked around at the arena below him. Fire raged through large parts of the wooded area and buildings had been destroyed in the destruction their fight had caused. Never before had an opponent pushed him so far, caused him so much difficulty, embarrassed him, humiliated him, and threatened to defeat him. As Riser looked at the eyes of the tailed teen before him, he could see the mocking glint in Issei's eyes. The scion knew that he would win. Knew it as if it had always been a sure thing. Riser couldn't take that. He would not lose. Issei watched as Riser began to laugh, first a low rumbling chuckle, but soon it became an overwhelming tirade of full-bodied guffaws. The man's eyes had a wild psychotic streak as he laughed, and when they locked with Issei's there was a burning hatred there that spelled murderous intent. "You're good," Riser sneered. "Very good, for a filthy monkey creature." Issei snarled at the man's remark, but Riser continued in the same sneering manner. "But I am going to win now. You have made me use something I shouldn't, but I am Riser Phoenix and Riser Phoenix always gets what Riser Phoenix wants." He screamed the last word as he thrust his arms out and his legs downward like a cross. As he did so, fire covered his body in a blazing inferno so hot that even Issei had to back away. Infirmary. Akino lay on a bed beside the defeated members of Rias Peerage. The four of them there had all awoken and moved onto a single bed together, whilst nurses tended to any wounds that remained and allowed the young devils to rest. On the other side of the room in a set of beds was the members of Riser's Peerage. By this stage all of the devils of both peerages were awake and watching the fight intently on a large flat-screen monitor. Many of the young members of Riser's Peerage were simply astounded by the power, skill, and speed that Issei possessed. Only Shualan and Yubaluna had met the saiyan before, and even they had not known how capable he was. As the fight had gone on, the members of Riser's Peerage had been shocked to learn that it seemed Issei had indeed been correct. Many of them had mocked the saiyan's claim that Riser would become exhausted and lose, but over time their mockery turned first to disbelief and then silent acceptance as what the tailed boy predicted came to pass. Finally Riser rose, once again looking very much worse for wear and unable to continue much longer when he began to laugh in loud wholehearted bursts that quick became rather maniacal. The devil then spat insults at Issei, which caused Akino to clench her fists in anger at him speaking to her boyfriend in such a manner before immolating himself in a strange fashion. Akino was going to ask Kiba for his opinion when heat filled the room. With a gasp the Gremory devils all watched on as the whole peerage of Riser also burst into flames. The flames didn't burn the girls, however they did scream out in pain as a red misty substance floated out of their bodies, and then each one collapsed onto the bed unconscious once again as the flames vanished as the mist swirled out of the room as if being called to a location. More nursing staff rushed into the room and immediately began tending to the now once again incapacitated peerage. "Look," Asia stated whilst pointing at the monitor, and the group turned to watch the events unfold out in the arena. Issei. Issei watched as swirls of red mist flooded into Riser from all around. He attempted to move forward, however the heat drove him back further. The flames around Riser grew to a monstrous proportion and Riser's voice could be heard yelling out from within. Issei watched on as the flames began to take a shape, that of a large bird completely wreathed in fire. It took Issei a moment to process, but then he gathered the gist of what had happened. Somehow Riser had turned herself into a giant 40-foot phoenix. The avian Riser twisted its massive head toward Issei and spoke with a disembodied and rather disconcerting bird-like voice. "Well, I must say, this is a feeling of power I could get used to. Time to burn, monkey boy." At that the monstrous bird opened its mouth and a great torrent of flame bellowed out toward Issei. The saiyan dived away as the flames flicked at his tail, causing some of the fine hairs to sizzle in the heat. He twisted and zoomed around the flame-covered bird trying to get close enough to attack, but each time he did the sheer heat of the creature beat him back. Issei dived in and out for a dozen times trying to get close enough while also attempting to avoid the waves of fire that chased him. Flames licked at his flesh causing burns to blister up immediately and Issei was forced to back off. Beneath him the woodlands raged in an inferno and Issei chanced a quick glance back to Rias. His girlfriend had moved back onto a two-story building but was far enough away from the fire to be safe for the time being. Issei looked back to the giant bird before him and knew that he would be forced to use ki to win the fight now. He unleashed a barrage of ki blasts toward Riser in a quick succession. As the blue-white spheres approached, Riser unleashed another torrent of flame and Issei watched on as his ki was negated and destroyed by the fires of his enemy. This situation was becoming slightly worried. He could no longer fight up close and Riser had become powerful enough to fight against his ki. This same thought must have also occurred to Riser because the bird let out a hideous laugh before screaming at Issei. "I think it's time we finish this now, monkey." At that Riser opened his mouth and his chest puffed out as he inhaled great amounts of air. Issei knew enough about fire to know more air meant more heat and power. He cupped his hands by his side and began to concentrate his ki into one point. Riser's lungs met their maximum. Like, Riser pushed his head forward, Guyuan, Issei's ki aura flared purple as the flames began to pour from Riser toward him. Fire! An almighty beam of purple energy erupted from Issei's hands toward the tremendous torrent of flames that Riser projected. The two beams collided and crashed against each other. Issei tensed at the feeling of resistance against his Gallic gun and screamed out as he poured ki into the attack. Riser made a sound of aggression and the flames of his beam grew hotter and wilder. Issei grunted and struggled as he felt his beam become overwhelmed. He poured what ki he could into his attack as the struggle became even again, but Issei had no more to give. His ki dropped and the flames broke through, barreling along the purple beam. Issei cancelled his attack and curled into a ball, bracing himself. He knew he couldn't dodge the fast-moving beam of fire. As he braced, the beam struck him, burning skin and incinerating his clothing. His hair burnt and melted on his head and tail while pain shot through his body in heavy crashing waves. Issei was thrown back as if shot from a cannon and covered a great distance before crashing into the ground near where Rias was located. His body lay broken, burnt and with immense pain flooding through him as his girlfriend landed beside him with tears flowing freely from her eyes. "Issei, no," the devil girl said in a distraught voice. "I can't let this happen to you." She spoke frantically while staring at the burnt, close-to-death body of her boyfriend. Issei wasn't sure what she was planning to do, but the look in her eyes said it wasn't a good idea. With immense pain, he opened his mouth to speak again. The act of moving his tongue causing lightning stabs of pain to erupt through his brutalized nerve endings. As he said with a struggle, I can issei, still win." The devil girl looked down on him in surprise and remorse at the idea of him continuing to fight while internally he prepared to utilize the Kaioken. Rias felt the remains of Issei's ki begin to build and knew what he was going to attempt. She dropped to her knees beside him, resting a hand on his face gently. "No. You can't do that. You won't be able to, it'll kill you," she cried as tears formed once more in her eyes. Issei was preparing to argue back with her when the voice of Drake filled both their minds. "Stop, Issei, there is a better way. Rias, once he has beaten this arse, remember to calm him if necessary." Issei was puzzled for a moment before he felt Drake's magic working from within him. He was unable to move a muscle and watched as a silvery orb appeared above him in the arena. Rias looked up at the now formed full moon and knew what was to come. She turned her head toward the approaching phoenix that had now stopped to look at the sudden miniature moon inside the stadium. Rias dropped her eyes to Issei, who was clearly fighting the beast within him. "I know you can control it, Issei. I know you can protect me." Her voice was sincere, and as she spoke he locked his eyes on hers. Issei saw in his vision the great golden ape again, but as it roared he felt himself rear up to his full monstrous height and face it, staring it down and beating his own chest whilst roaring back in response. As his roar finished, the ape stood still and stared at him for what felt like an eternity before lowering its head. At that, Issei's eyes went wide and he felt power and strength flood into him in a manner he had never felt before. His body grew rapidly and fur covered his body thickly. The burns that had riddled his body healed, and by the time Issei was on his feet he felt as if he had awoken from a brilliant sleep. He looked around himself. The buildings were his equals now, as his head rose well above the roof of the two-story building Rias had been on moments earlier. He then looked down at his crimson-haired girlfriend, who gave him a determined smile and a thumbs up before he snapped his eyes onto the fiery bird before him. The phoenix looked completely shocked and Issei decided to steal his line. "Time to show you what this monkey can do," he bellowed out in a deep primeval voice. At that, Issei began sprinting toward Riser. The trees tore from the ground around him as the ground below him shook and trembled. Riser flew directly at Issei, and as the pair came closer and closer Issei noticed that the heat was nothing to him now. He raised his fist and collided it with the talon of Riser. The phoenix screeched out in pain and Issei grabbed a hold of the monstrous bird's leg. He squeezed deeply into the creature of fire's flesh and began slamming the giant avian into the ground over and over. With each strike he could hear the sound of bones breaking and felt the limpness in Riser as his body was crushed. Issei then tossed Riser to the ground and stomped his foot into him. A high-pitched scream broke from the bird's lips and Issei held his large furry palm out at his opponent, gathering ki within it. The swirling mass of white and blue energy filled his hand, easily the size of a large truck, and he unleashed it all at point-blank range into the battered avian form of Riser. An explosion erupted as the ki detonated on the phoenix's exposed chest, and as the dust-settled flame could no longer be seen. The monstrous bird was no longer beneath Issei's massive feet. Instead, Lying barely breathing but alive was the utterly defeated body of Riser Phoenix. Issei beat against his chest and bellowed out his victory. In a final measure to ensure his total defeat of the arrogant noble, he bent and lifted the crumpled body once more in a single fist, squeezed and tossed the man hard down into the wooded ground. He turned to see an ecstatic Rias flying toward him as Graphia's voice for the last time filled the arena with commentary. Riser Phoenix has been eliminated. Rias Gremory is the victor. Issei felt happiness and exhaustion take a hold of him in that moment. He no longer wished to be the gigantic ape that he was, and so with a small blast of ki he eliminated the miniature moon that was still floating above him inside the arena. As it vanished in a burst of dust and debris, he felt himself shrink, becoming smaller while also himself once again. The thick burns had left his body, but the toll of the injuries hadn't, and as his feet touched the ground he felt himself instantaneously collapsing. The ground rushed up to him as red hair filled his vision, and that was all Issei could register before losing consciousness completely.